All right, so we're going to review factoring, all the different types, so that way, hopefully it'll make a little more sense if you're confused. The first problem we're going to do is x squared minus 5x minus 6. So your first step is always look for a GCF. Always look for GCF. And a GCF is the greatest common factor. So the biggest number that you can divide by each of the terms. If you look at this, x squared minus 5x minus 6, there is no GCF besides 1, so that's not really helpful. So we can move on to try to factor this. And when you do, you're going to have two sets of parentheses with two blanks in each, okay? The number that's in the first blank comes from that first number of our quadratic. So you'll have two numbers in the purple blanks. You have to multiply to be x squared. Since it's just x squared, it's going to be x and x. Now, the next two numbers in the blanks, the second two blanks, those have to multiply to be negative 6. So you can list out different options that multiply to be negative 6. So you can say like 1 and negative 6, or negative 1 and 6, or 2 and negative 3, or negative 2 and positive 3. And what you want to do is fill in the second blanks with one of those options. Okay? So as you process through, you want to make sure that it will work when you multiply it out, right? When you distribute it out to get you back where you started. So a shortcut for this, if it's just x squared, is what multiplies to be negative 6, and in this case adds to be negative 5. So we're looking for two numbers that fit that description. So if you're taking a look at these options, the four that we have, the one that would work is 1 and negative 6. It just happened to be the first one. It may not have been the first one that you tried, but if we put a positive 1 and a negative 6 here, we can double check our work. And you could multiply the whole thing out. But we already know that those two numbers multiply to be x squared, so that's why we put them there. We already know that these numbers multiply to be negative 6. That's why we put them there. So the only ones we really have to check is multiplying x times negative 6, which is negative 6x, and 1 times x is positive 1x, or positive x, which gives us negative 5x, which is what we wanted, which means we factored it correctly, so that would be our final answer. Notice how we had to do some work on the side, like this stuff here. That is totally fine, okay? Especially until you get really good at it, you may have to do that, which is okay. Another thing I want to point out is, since our 6 was negative, that means one of the numbers was positive and one of the answers was negative, the numbers that we filled in the blank. So keep track of the sign of the second number, because that will dictate the signs that appear in your equation. Okay, let's do another example of 2x cubed minus 18x. Okay, so just like last time, our first step is to look to see, do we have a GCF? Is there a number that we can divide by both 2x, or an expression, because you can also divide an x, by 2x cubed and negative 18x. So you would notice that they're both even, so you can divide them by 2. And that seems to be the biggest number that you can divide by both 2 and 18. So a 2 will come on the outside, and you have x cubed and x, which means you can take out an x from both. You can't take out an x squared because this term only has one x. So you can't take out any more than what is there. When you take out a 2x, you'll still have your two blanks on the inside, right? Because we have two values there. So to figure out what goes on the inside, you'll say 2x times what would give me 2x cubed? Well, or 2x cubed divided by 2x, that would go in the blank. So we would have 2 divided by 2 is 1. X cubed divided by x is x squared. That's what we have left. For the next blank, you'll have 2x times what gives you negative 18x. So 2x times negative 9 gives us negative 18x. Okay, that would be the first step. We factored out the GCF, we're on the right track. But now we have to look to see, can you factor what's on the inside of the parentheses even more? And when you have a squared variable, you should always check that, like a squared exponent, like x squared. So if you have x squared minus 9, you could rewrite that to help you visualize x squared plus 0x minus 9. And again, we can guess and check by trying to figure out what numbers multiply to be negative 9. Since it's negative, one number is positive, one number is negative. And don't forget, you have your 2x on the outside, and you'll have two sets of parentheses. What goes in the first blank is x and x from the x squared. Then you have to figure out what multiplies to be negative 9, and that could be 1 and negative 9, negative 1 and 9, 3 and negative 3, negative 3 and 3. And most of the time people do this in their head. If you need to write it out, again, that's okay. But notice how in the expression, there is, when you multiply it out, you end up getting 0. So you're looking for something that'll cancel out each other when you go ahead and distribute. So your best bet is the 3 and negative 3, or negative 3 and 3. Those are equivalent. So if you do plus 3 minus 3, you can double check to see if you did it correctly by distributing. X and negative 3 is negative 3x, 3 and x, positive 3x. When you combine those, they give you 0x. So yeah, we did it correctly. That means this is our final answer. A common mistake is to forget that 2x, your GCF. Don't forget that guy. All right, we're going to do a couple more examples. Let's look at 2x squared minus x minus 3. Okay, so just like last time, do we have a GCF? Is there a number that we can divide by each of these terms? Nope, there is not this time. So that means we're going to go right into our two factors. And again, we have the first blank and the second blank. Since the first number is 2x squared, that means what goes in the first blank has to multiply to be 2x squared. Which means it's not just going to be x and x this time. It's going to be 2x and x. That's our only option since 2 is prime. Makes our life a little easier. So we have to now figure out what goes in the second blank, which comes from the negative 3. What numbers multiply to be negative 3? And again, since it's negative, that means one of these numbers is going to be positive and one of them is going to be negative. So like 1 and negative 3 or a negative 1 and 3. Here is where you may have to guess and check. So when you go to plug either one of those pairs of numbers in, you know that they're going to have to add to be negative 1, if you want to put that there to help you visualize. But let's see, if I were to put, let's just say we go with this first option here, and we say positive 1 and negative 3. To double check if you did it correctly, you'll have to multiply it out. So let's do that. 2x times negative 3 is negative 6x. 1 times x is positive 1x. When you combine those, you get negative 5x. Now, looking at what we started with, we wanted to add to be negative 1. So that's no good, which means we're going to have to erase and try different numbers. Now, since our only other option, well, we could try flipping the signs. But we weren't even close. We had negative 5 and we want negative 1. So we're not even close to negative 1. Flipping the signs wouldn't help us much. It would only give us a positive 5x when we multiplied it out. So that means we're going to have to switch where things are. So you may say, let's switch it and make it negative 1 and positive 3. Let's see if that works. So you multiply it out, just like last time. 2x and positive 3 is 6x. And, I think I switched the signs, which isn't super helpful. Let's do this. Positive 1 and negative 3. So when you multiply, you'll have 2x and negative 3. So negative 6x. Oh, I just did that problem. I need to switch the 1 and the 3. Whoop. So the 3 will go here and the 1 will go there. Sorry about that. So when you go, you have to actually move the numbers, and I did not do that. Whoops. So here we go. You multiply 2x and negative 1, so you'll get negative 2x. 3 times x is positive 3x. When you combine those, you get a positive 1x. So looking there, you're really close, but you want a negative 1x, which means you're going to have to flip the signs. Instead of having a positive 3, you'll have a negative 3. Instead of a negative 1, you'll have a positive 1. So now when you go to multiply, 2x times 1 is positive 2x. And then negative 3 times x is negative 3x, which would give you negative 1x, which is what we want, which means this would be our final answer when we guess and check. Okay? Last but not least, we're going to do one more. Negative 4x squared plus 16x minus 16. Okay? If you want to pause this and try it out, that might be a good idea. But otherwise, you can listen up and we can do it together. First step is to look for a GCF. Is there a number that we can divide, or an expression that we can divide by each term? And they're all even, which means we can divide by 2, but there's actually a bigger GCF of 4. But I want you to notice how this number, this coefficient that's in front of the x squared, is negative. Whenever that happens, you want to make it positive. It makes your life so much easier when you go to factor having the number in front of the x squared be positive. So that would mean our GCF is actually going to be negative 4. So when you divide out a negative 4, you'll still have 3 terms left. So when you do 4x squared, negative 4x squared divided by negative 4, you're left with x squared positive, which is good. Positive 16x divided by 4 is negative 4x. And a negative 16 divided by negative 4 is a negative 4. Positive 4. So now from here, just like last time, you have a squared variable on the inside of the parentheses, so you want to look to see, can I factor this more? And you ask yourself, what multiplies to be a positive 4, right? That last term there. And since we don't have an a value, you can ask what adds to be negative 4. Keep that negative 4 on the outside. You'll have your 2 sets of parentheses. The first blanks have to multiply to be x, so we know that's x and x. And numbers that multiply to be positive 4 is 2 and 2. Or it's positive, so it could be negative 2 and negative 2. Or 4 and 1. Or negative 4, negative 1. Since it needs to add to be negative 4, though, that's a hint to you that your number should be negative. So right away, you can cross off the positive options. And looking at what we have, the negative 2 and negative 2 is going to work. Negative 2, negative 2. But let's double check. X times negative 2 is negative 2x. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. So yeah, that does add to be negative 4x. But if you wanted to factor this more, you actually could. Since you have x minus 2 and x minus 2, well, what do we put if we have a thing multiplied by itself? We can have an exponent, which means we'll have the negative 4. It can be simplified further to be x minus 2 quantity squared. If you left it like that one, that's okay too at this point, but this one is better. More factored, okay? Hope that helps. Email me with questions.